Jonetta Rose Barras, you're the author of a new book titled The Last of the Black Emperors, The Hollow Comeback of Marion Barry in the New Age of Black Leaders. When you sat down to write and research this book, what kind of reader did you have in mind?
I actually had a general reader in mind, one who doesn't necessarily follow politics. And so I was more interested in contextualizing Marion Barry so that the average reader would see him connected to something, connected to a cultural tradition and connected to an American political tradition, because I think a lot of people have looked at Marion Barry as unique, sort of an appendage of the political process, when he is actually, I think, an integral part of it and represents what American politics has become.
Where did Marion Barry grow up?
In Itta Bena, Mississippi, a small southern town. Actually, it's a little bit outside Itta Bena, on a plantation. His parents were sharecroppers and picked cotton, and they were very, very poor. They had a pretty rough life.
What was his formal education?
They went from Itta Bena to Arkansas for a little while, and then they went to Memphis. And so he went to school in Memphis, and then he went to Lemoyne College. Then he went to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee.
What year was he working on his doctorate?
I was in the 1960s, 67, I'm sorry, in the early 60s, around 57, 60, somewhere around that time.
Was it unusual for a young black man at the time to be progressing towards a doctorate?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there were quite a few blacks who had gotten doctorates before. It was not unusual for African Americans to really struggle to go as high as they could with their college educations.
You mentioned in your book that he taught for a while. Where did he teach, and when did he stop teaching?
In Louisville for a while. It was only for one semester. He was a student teacher, and decided to come back to work in the movement.
What is the SNCC, and what was Marion Barry's involvement in that group?
It's pronounced SNCC, and it's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. It was a sort of the youth arm of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that was started with a number of ministers in the South.
From the South, how did Marion Barry come to Washington, and why?
James Foreman, who was the field secretary for SNCC at the time, decided that Washington, D.C. was sort of ripe for organizing. And Marion Barry was actually sent to Washington to help organize a chapter of SNCC and you know, sort of stimulate some activity. Actually organized the first bus boycott. It was a one-day boycott. Because
in Washington?
In Washington, D.C. in 1965. So Marion Barry came. There was some struggle to, the bus company wanted to raise the fare. People were, of course, opposed to that. They were also, they didn't necessarily like the way they were treated by the company. And so there was a boycott that was organized for one day. It was pretty successful. Marion Barry obviously built his career on that particular successful action.
When was he first elected mayor of Washington, D.C.?
He was elected as the second mayor. The first mayor was Walter Washington, and Marion Barry was elected in 1978 as the second mayor of Washington, D.C., and remained mayor until 1990 when Sharon Pratt Kelly was elected. And then he, of course, reappeared in 1994 as the fourth, he was came back and succeeded Sharon Pratt Kelly.
In your book, you write about the 1994 election. What are some of the details? How did Marion Barry get elected in 1994? What was different about that election?
I don't think there was anything really different about that election. I think probably the thing that was different was that he had been arrested in 1990 by the FBI in an FBI sting at the Vista Hotel, where he was caught with a woman who was not his wife in a hotel room, who and he was smoking, or had just put a crack pipe to his mouth. And so no one thought, after such an international fall from grace, that he could possibly return to political office. There was an animosity in Washington, D.C. about the way that FBI sting actually occurred. A lot of people called it a setup. One of the things people were angry over was that here was Marion Barry in a room. He had gone to see a woman, principally, ostensibly, to have sex, and she actually kept suggesting to him drugs, and he kept saying no, and she kept suggesting, and so people got the general impression that he might not have smoked that crack pipe if she hadn't pushed him into it as a sort of a prelude to some romantic involvement. And it was that animosity then that he worked to his advantage. There was this real epidemic in all urban centers in America, certainly in Washington, D.C., with crack cocaine. One of the most insidious drugs that had hit the American market of late. And so they were particularly, I think, sympathetic to his struggle with drugs. And so you had that combination of anger and sympathy sort of rolling into one, working with a very seasoned politician who understood the psychology of the city that he had led for almost 12, 16 years.
What role did the press have in covering Marion Barry from the beginning of his mayoral career and during this whole trial about the drug situation?
Oh, in the beginning, Marion Barry was seen in Washington as a savior. And he was seen as someone who could actually help structure a government. It was the Washington Post endorsement that actually kicked him up and had him win against Walter Washington and Sterling Tucker. The Washington Post pretty much supported him. But like the rest of the city, they became very disillusioned when there were repeated rumors of his drug use, his womanizing. He was caught. The Post and the other Washington media, the Washington Times and black media, build him up. And yet, and I would have to say that they played a strong role in his decline.
In your book, you write about the Washington Post, and I wanted to read one of the sentences that you wrote about the 1994 coverage. Mm-hmm. The Washington Post went after Barry with a vengeance, covering his campaign like white on rice. Wherever he went, reporters were there, and what the news pages missed, the editorial pages picked up on. It was an awesome assault that only an omnipotent institution like the Post could mount. What did you mean by that sentence?
I think that they were all over him. It was like a Michael Jordan kind of thing. The Washington Post has the luxury of having as many as 25 reporters they can assign to cover one story in a minute. And so you have to remember that they had endorsed Sharon Pratt Kelly, Marion Barry's predecessor, or the incumbent in that race. She performed very poorly, but they also did not want Marion Barry to return. And so the Washington Post staff then went after finding the facts and finding out whether Marion Barry was actually redeemed. Was he using drugs? What was he doing in his personal life that could affect his professional career and his professional life?
I wanted to mention a couple names and just have you describe for us Marion Barry's relationship with these people. Mm-hmm. One name is Reverend Jesse Jackson. Are they friends? Are they foes? What's their relationship?
I think that at one point that they were friends. They both were in the movement together, but clearly Jesse Jackson was much closer to the Reverend Martin Luther King than Marion Barry. At this point, I think that there is a healthy but distant respect for each other.
How about Andrew Brimmer? Who is Andrew Brimmer, and what's their relationship?
Andrew Brimmer is the director of the D.C. Financial Responsibility and Management Assistance Authority, commonly called the Control Board here, which was created by Congress. Created by Congress in March 1995. And so Andrew Brimmer is the chairman of that board. And I think Andrew Brimmer is sort of the same coin. Marion Barry and Andrew Brimmer are the same coin, just different sides of it.
How many times has Marion Barry been married? And tell us about his wives. Who's he married to now?
He's married to Cora Masters, and she was someone who had supported him for a very long time, back in the 80s, and was a friend of the family, is how my sources tell me, and developed a relationship with him while he was still married.
Was she the one on the boxing commission?
Yes,
what was
she was the chairman of the boxing commission for a while. She was accused of double dipping, charging the city for expenses and charging the federal boxing commission for the Federation of Boxing Commission for the same expenses. She pleaded guilty to avoid actual jail time and prosecution, and repaid the money. She and the mayor remained very good friends, and he made sure she had access to that. And she still remains pretty active in that industry. Prior to her was Effie Cowell, rather, while he was still married to his second wife. Marion Barry began an affair with her, and just before he decided to run for mayor, he and Effie were married. They had a child, Christopher. Effie Cowell and Marion Barry were divorced just after the end of the trial, the drug possession trial.
And she was the third wife?
She was actually, yes, his third wife.
Okay.
Now, the second wife was Mary Treadwell. Now,
and who was the first wife?
The first wife was Blanty Evans, whom he met while he was in college and divorced shortly thereafter. She divorced him, actually accused him of desertion.
Did you attend his 1995 inaugural that you described where Maya Angelou read poetry? Tell us what happened there.
It was at the D.C. University of the District of Columbia. Maya Angelou read this poem by Sterling Brown, Strong Men, which actually sort of charts the life of African Americans in this country, from slavery, their struggle through Jim Crow, and their amazing resilience, which really gave him, I think, much more currency and credentials than he probably deserved. But nonetheless, it was an exciting moment. It was a very emotional moment for him, for his wife, for his son, to see that a man who had fallen so low was now picked up and placed on the shoulders of this city, much the way football players would do a winning coach.
In your book, your subtitle is The Hollow Comeback of Marion Barry. Do you view his comeback as hollow? And tell us more about your subtitle.
The substance of what he did in 1992 as a city council member representing one of the city's more underserved and poor populations, he actually, in my view and from the facts, did very little for those people during the 1 year that he was actually representing them. And so while he may have thought that coming into office would give him the opportunity to reshape his legacy and reposition himself as a major power in African American political history, in fact, what it did was to make him completely impotent.
For the book, did you interview him?
No, he refused to participate in the book.
Why?
Well, now, I don't know why. I think he understood that I was coming to this story with a wealth of information. I've been covering the city since 1984.
For what paper?
For the Washington Afro-American, and then later the Washington Times, and then later Washington City paper.
Are you a conservative?
No, I'm not. I consider myself an independent, and I think I have Marion Barry to thank for that, because I at one time in 1982 actually went to work for his campaign as assistant to his to the press person, the press secretary for his second term, and grew disillusioned with the organization of that campaign, although he did win. So it was seeing various things up close that I was able to realize that I could not just attach my endorsement and support to a politician simply because he was black. And I think that a number of African Americans throughout this country have done that. And so the book, which talks about the new age of black leaders, goes right to that. The broader theme of the book is to sort of assess what we as African Americans must do if we are going to really be politically empowered in this country. And part of it is to objectively evaluate our leaders, not just to stand behind them and support everything they do simply because they're black.
I have two final questions. 20, 30 years from now, when people look back at the history of Washington, D.C. and Marion Barry, what will his legacy be?
I think the main thing that people will remember about Marion Barry is that he helped in a very dramatic way to expand the middle class here. Marion Barry did a great deal to help to create that middle class.
Is he going to run again in 1998? And if he does, would you vote for him?
I don't expect him to run again in 1998. I think that Marion Barry understands that with the control board, he will have no power until the year 2002, and Congress may be inclined to strip him of the last few little agencies that he currently has power over.
Jonetta Rose Barras, we thank you for coming into C-SPAN to talk to us about The Last of the Black Emperors, the hollow comeback of Marion Barry in the new age of